All right. Philosophy of the paranormal. Aliens and UFOs today. Let's let some people in. Well, there's not too many people here yet, but let's let them in. Oh. All right. Let's wait another minute, as usual, to give people a chance to get here, because there's only 7 of us. Oh, correction, 8 of us. I think today's going to be a fun one. All right. Okay, so let's close some stuff. Or no, I have to keep that open, don't I? Okay, no spoilers. I have not seen it. I want to see it. My partner and I want to go see that. Yeah, man, I really like Get Out. What was the other one? There's a couple other ones. What was the one? What was the one with the people, the duplicates? Us? Was it Us? Oh, that one was awesome. Yeah, Us was super creepy. Yeah, I think I like Us. Get Out was awesome, but Us was cool. What was the other one? It was a remake of something. Had bees in it. Candyman. Saw Candyman too. I think I saw Candyman. Actually, I just watched a weird movie with Ethan Hawke. My partner and I watched it last night. It was called The Black Phone, I think. Interesting. It kind of mixes up like a kidnapping serial killer story with like some supernatural stuff, and I enjoyed it, even though me, I don't believe in the supernatural, but I still enjoyed the movie, because it was cool. Like dead people calling you on the phone, that kind of thing, super creepy. So that was good. Yeah, you should definitely check that out. Okay, it looks like we've got 12 people here, so let's just get going. I'm going to share my screen. Today it's aliens and UFOs. Let's get the slideshow up here. I'm going to kind of riff a lot during this lecture, but that's okay because it is a topic that I know fairly well. Come on, computer. So very slow. Oh, come on. Here we go. Or not.
What's it like having a computer made of cardboard and potatoes?
It's not fun. It's bad. I mean, I had a decent computer and then the hard drive crapped out. And I borrowed this one from my sister. And she lent it to me because she was like, I never use this because my older computer's better. And I was like, yeah, I can see that. So that's the next big purchase for me, is a faster computer. Right. So yeah, UFOs and aliens are one of those popular paranormal topics, I'd say. UFOs have or unidentified flying objects have been cited since antiquity, although they were not always called UFOs. That's a 20th century invention, that term. But there are plenty of accounts of strange phenomena in the sky that go right back to antiquity. And this is, I think, the impetus for a lot of those ancient astronaut theories, which we'll talk a little bit about today, actually, because that's kind of how I framed this lecture in years past. But most UFOs are probably natural phenomena. We talked a little bit about this previously, how in the astrology and horoscopes lecture, how the skies are, you know, very permanent from our point of view, right? The stars move in the same way every night. They rotate around that celestial North Pole if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, and nothing ever really changes. The planets, they wander a bit, but they always seem to trace the same or a similar path through the sky year after year. It's only when something changes that it catches our attention. It seems salient. Here we're probably talking when it comes to ancient peoples. Well, imagine if you saw a comet or a supernova, a new addition to the night sky. That would probably be pretty freaky. And it's arguable that ancient people who saw these things maybe thought that they were associated with gods or some kind of more powerful being. I think that makes sense, especially in an Indo-European context where we already have a sky father, right? Deus Pater is the sky father, literally, a god who lives in the heavens, sky father. And think about it. In ancient myths, what do gods do? I mean, if they have some kind of power, what kind of power do they have? Think of an all-father type figure, a Zeus. What do they do?
All weather related.
Yeah, it's weather related. What does Zeus do?
Castrate his father.
Well, he did, yes. But Zeus possesses the thunderbolt, right? And if you're like an ancient human, and you're stuck in a thunderstorm, forget about celestial phenomena, just talk about aerial phenomena. Lightning must have been one of the most freaky, powerful, frightening things. So Zeus, Jupiter, and maybe the Sky Father, they possess the thunderbolt. Yeah, Andrea says storms, also generally speaking, storms, weather, and floods. Exactly. I mean, in the Old Testament, what does Yahweh do? He floods the world. Noah, build that ark, get the animals on it, flood's coming, right? Or war gods or protector gods. What do they have? Does anybody know the god Indra from the Hindu religion? Indra's a boss because Indra rides a war elephant and he also has the thunderbolt. Who else? Come on. War god. He loves. What's that?
No, I'm thinking Freya. That's like a Norse god. No, Freya's not a god of war, though.
Oh, Freya's healing and fertility. And it's actually pronounced Freya.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, but you're not far off. Everyone loves this guy. He's in movies now.
Thor.
Yeah. Yeah. What does Thor do? He's got a hammer with lightning. Yeah. So the sky, right? It's all about the sky. The sky is a scary, powerful place where powerful beings live. That's been one of the ways that humans have placed themselves in the world for millennia. And I don't think that's because aliens were actually visiting us and we mistook them for gods. Rather, I think it's just because some big crazy stuff was happening in the sky. Lightning, storms, comets, meteors, supernova, eclipses. That's another example, actually. Eclipses occur on a regular cycle called the Saros cycle. So we can now predict when eclipses are going to happen. In fact, we've been able to do this since antiquity. It was the ancient Greek philosopher Thales who predicted an eclipse, and as a result was accused of being a witch. So eclipses seem to come out of nowhere, and they're freaky too. Oh yeah, I bet a lot of people damage their eyesight from doing that. Yeah. Well, remember the most recent one in North America? It was when Trump was still president, and he looked at the sun. Yeah. Peak Trump right there, staring at the sun. So yeah, eclipses are another sort of a celestial thing where the sun, where'd the sun go? Holy moly, the world's probably going to end, guys. I even had a conversation with this is a personal anecdote, so do with it what you will, but in grad school for a while I was working at this Tim Hortons. Actually, that's a really good point. Yeah. Well, yeah, that makes sense. Like, the Inuit people have glasses that they make to help prevent snow blindness. I imagine a similar sort of setup would probably protect you against some of the light from an eclipse as well. So, yeah, that's a really good point. These would have been not like my glasses, but made of maybe some bark or bone with a slit, like just a narrow slit. And then that way the light reflecting off the snow doesn't blind you, right? Because the snow is really bright. Anyway, what was I saying? Right, eclipses.
Personal anecdote.
My eclipse anecdote where it was around that same time of that eclipse, and I was like, I probably won't get a good view of it from here. It's not really going to be that visible from here. And my boss, who was I suppose a very superstitious person, said like, oh, that's a sign of the end, she was absolutely serious. She was like, yeah, that's oh, I remember she said, according to my faith, that's a sign of the end times. I think she was probably Christian, and I'm not knocking religion, guys, I'm not. But she believed that, maybe eclipse, maybe end of the world. And I just had to say, like, no, we know when all the eclipses are going to happen. Like, we've figured it out. We've got like eclipse calendars. You don't need to worry, But I was just kind of like, what? I never had someone say that to me before. Like, that it could be the end of the world. I'm like, well, no, like what? It's just the sun and the moon and the earth going on. No big deal. Go out and enjoy it safely if you can see it. So, the sky, lots of crazy stuff happens in the sky. And some people, like our ancient astronauts, probably thought that this was because they were beings. Nowadays, people still mistake some natural phenomena for unidentified flying objects, which they believe are alien spacecraft, right? Of the ones that aren't natural, there's probably some kind of artificial explanation. When we look closely at most claims around UFO sightings, we find that they turn out to be a number of different artificial or natural phenomena. They can be as simple as clouds. Who's ever seen a lenticular cloud?
Can someone explain what a lenticular cloud is?
Yes, I can explain. A lenticular cloud is a really weird looking cloud that looks like a flying saucer. I've never seen one in real life. I've only seen them in pictures, but I'll put this in the chat so that you can go Google it after. I believe this is how it's spelled, but go check that out and you'll see they look like big giant flying saucers, almost like like the spaceships from Independence Day or something, right? They're huge. Balloons. The Roswell crash. Oh, cumulonimbus cloud. Yeah. Well, a cumulonimbus cloud is, of course, much more common than a lenticular cloud. These are your thunderstorms, right? So if you see a cumulonimbus cloud, Zeus or Thor or somebody's probably hanging out up there. So anyway, balloons. The Roswell crash was probably a downed weather balloon. It's interesting. It was explained, and it wasn't really, wasn't really a big deal until the sort of false memory factor kicked in. And people were like, no, I know what I saw, and it wasn't a balloon. Well, we have debris from a balloon, and so the story grew from there, that there were alien bodies that were recovered and are kept at Area 51 or something like that. I mean, that's a fun theory, isn't it? Good stuff. Drones. When drones were new, drones are, there's a big drone subculture now. Lots of people have drones. There's clubs that you can join with your drone, and nowadays drones are a bit more ubiquitous, but when they were new, I'm sure that there were some drones that got mistaken for UFOs. I'm absolutely positive that happened. Meteors. A meteor. What is a meteor?
Is that when something's coming into the atmosphere is burning up?
Yeah, the shooting star. That's a
Yeah.
meteor.
Okay.
If it reaches the ground, let's see. Yeah, space rock. Exactly. The what you see of the space rock breaking up in the atmosphere is the meteor. If the space rock hits the ground, we call that a meteorite. If it misses the Earth, we call it a meteor wrong. It's a little space humor for you. One of the most commonly reported UFOs is the International Space Station, which I mentioned last time. And you can see the International Space Station going overhead. You can see a lot of artificial satellites this way because there's so many artificial satellites now. And artificial satellites, just like the moon, a natural satellite, reflect sunlight. So sometimes at night, if you're lucky, you can see an artificial satellite, and you can tell it's an artificial satellite because it moves in a straight line and it goes fast. Okay, if you spot an airplane high up, you can hear it. You can see the blinking lights. But it goes slowly across the sky, like, it's going like this. An artificial satellite is doing this, like overhead. It's going very fast. I mean, the International Space Station orbits Earth, I think, once every 90 minutes. And the Earth at the surface is for about 40,000 kilometers around. And the International Space Station is, so many kilometers up. So it's going even farther. And it's doing that every 90 minutes. So it's going fast. Certain lightning phenomena, not necessarily the lightning that strikes the ground, but like sprites, elves, these weird phenomena, maybe ball lightning, St. Elmo's fire. These all might be mistaken for some kind of alien craft or technology. Or stars. Sirius, I mentioned last time, is quite often mistaken for a UFO because it appears to twinkle. Venus is often mistaken for a UFO because it's the brightest object in the night sky after the moon. But only a small percentage of these sightings go unexplained. And admittedly, some of them are compelling, especially the ones that are captured on video or some other means. As we take a look at the Pentagon's report, we'll see that some of these mysterious phenomena are captured on video. Some are captured on radar. Some are captured in infrared. So Some of them are captured on multiple types of sensors. So that's very cool. I guess because there's been crazy stuff happening in the sky for a long time, this is a motivator for the ancient astronaut hypothesis, which I had to mention. I know this is not UFO stuff, strictly speaking, but I just had to talk about it because it's very popular nowadays. You know, nowadays you've got shows like UFO Hunters, but you also have Ancient Aliens, of course. Ancient Aliens makes claims that are by no means new. Most of the claims that you'll see on this program go right back to this guy, Eric von Daniken. He's an interesting fellow. We'll talk about him in a moment. I don't want to address particular claims made by the show in too much detail, but the overall claim made by von Daniken and other ancient astronaut theorists, as they call themselves, is that aliens visited Earth in the distant past and that they've influenced human society. So as we're talking about all this stuff, definitely try and engage your pseudoscience detectors, right? Remember that pseudoscience might sound scientific, but it's really not. It doesn't follow the scientific method, right? Stonehenge. Yeah, we can talk about Stonehenge, actually. We'll talk about Stonehenge. We'll talk about the pyramids. We'll do it. Absolutely. So pseudoscience looks like science. It sounds like science, but it's not science. The claims are not falsifiable. The claims are not parsimonious. They often feature a lot more unwarranted assumptions than actual science. Cherry picking evidence is a big problem. Errors of reasoning. And pseudoscience, don't think of it as limited to just the natural sciences. The ancient astronaut hypothesis is as much pseudo-history and pseudo-archaeology as it is pseudoscience. You can see this because von Daniken is just not an archaeologist. He's not an archaeologist, and neither are any of the people on Ancient Aliens. They're ancient astronaut theorists, air quotes, heavy air quotes. Now, who's seen the episode of Carl Sagan for this class, the episode of Cosmos? Awesome. Yeah, Avi, yeah, I know, right? Like, imagine the ancient Egyptians must be like spinning in their sarcophaguses. Because, like, think about that. The Great Pyramid of Khufu probably took like 10, 20 years to build and probably featured a mixture of conscription laborers and some slave labor. Definitely not all slave labor as it's often imagined. A lot of it was conscription. But yeah, imagine that. And they wrote graffiti on there in the pyramid, right? Like they're like, you know, like Team A put this rock here, right? Like, or Team B we're faster than Team A. We have this graffiti. You can go and look it up. And yeah, like, yeah, if I was a ghost of an ancient Egyptian, I'd be like, what the, come on, man. We did that. And we know how they did a lot of it. So, but back to Sagan, you know, speaking of ancient Egypt, this is a really cool episode that I hope we get to discuss later. A really cool episode. He doesn't really examine specific cases of UFOs, with the exception of the Hill abduction case, which is a very famous UFO abduction case. And I'm going to try and follow Sagan's lead by trying to help you navigate between science and pseudoscience. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There were also a lot of boats, because the quarries were not near Giza. They were down the Nile. So there's thing number one. They had the Nile. The Nile is incredibly reliable in the way that it floods, which means that the Nile Delta and the Nile River Valley are incredibly fertile. So there was they were able to feed workers. There was no problem with food, no problem with putting these people up in housing or whatever, which is another great point. We've uncovered the cities that some of the workers who worked on the pyramids lived in. We found where they lived. And there's even a device nowadays that's still used in Egypt along the Nile to get water out. That's kind of like a crane with a basket on the end. And a similar device could have been used to move bricks, the big stones. So yeah, and they had simple technology. The ancient Egyptians didn't have the wheel, but they had the next best thing. They had logs. And they could just put logs down and roll the bricks or the blocks. Anyway, so yeah, I'm riffing a lot, but that's okay. Make sure you're taking notes. This is an exercise in navigating science, pseudoscience, and all this in between. Oh, cool. Oh man, maybe I can audit that. Yeah, thanks for that. I would audit that, because that would be pretty relevant for this. Okay, Eric von Daniken. He's a Swiss fellow who authored a book called Chariots of the Gods, which was big back in the 70s. My parents had a copy of this. I never read it, but I remember, like, oh wow, my parents have a copy of Chariots of the Gods. So who's Eric von Daniken? Is he an astronomer? Is he an archaeologist? No, he was a former hotel manager who spent time in prison for defrauding people. He wrote Chariots of the Gods when he was a hotel manager. He wrote his second book while he was in prison. And his whole thing is arguing that what these guys call the ancient astronaut hypothesis, the idea that ancient extraterrestrial life forms visited Earth and influenced the development of humanity in the distant past. And he has a number of different examples, and we can just kind of riff on these and talk about them all. One is the Baghdad Battery. One would be the giant heads of Easter Island. Of course, ancient Egypt. Here he is pointing at some ancient Egyptian stuff here in the background, like he's an Egyptologist or something. He's not. The Nazca Lines, of course. These are four big ones. So let's iterate through some of these examples. I wonder who has heard of the Baghdad Battery amongst all of you. The Baghdad Battery is something that we know from pictures and from archaeological evidence. Okay, so Jean-Francois hasn't heard of it. Abby hasn't. The Baghdad Battery is something that we know from, mostly from pictures. But it's something that ancient astronaut theorists, and that's their term, they are not theorists in even the loosest sense of that term. But ancient astronaut theorists, so-called, claim that the Baghdad Battery is literally a battery. And reconstructions of the Baghdad Battery are like a clay pot, which you fill with some kind of electrolyte. You could put vinegar in there. You could put whatever, some kind of electrolyte. And then there's metal inserts that can be placed in there. And you can actually light a light bulb with it. Yeah, you could put some Gatorade maybe. You can light a light bulb with it. It's kind of like when you make a potato clock. You ever make a potato clock? You get a little digital clock, just stick it in a potato or a lemon, and the electrolytes in there. Basically, an electrolyte is an ion. So if you've got some negative ions, you have what you need for a battery, and you just stick two wires and hook it to a thing. You've got a battery. You can do it with a potato, a lemon, or the Baghdad Battery. But was the Baghdad Battery really a battery? Well, we don't know that. Certainly, there's no evidence that the Baghdad Battery was actually used to turn on light bulbs. There are interesting illustrations of it that have light bulb-like objects attached to them, but were those light bulbs? I doubt it. We did not have the metallurgy nor the skill with glass making to produce light bulbs in ancient Iraq. We didn't have it. We actually don't know what the Baghdad Battery was for. The Baghdad Battery may not have been a battery at all. It might have been used in the production of wine. It could have been used as a jar to distill or to brew wine. It could have been used in the making of jewelry. If you put some kind of electrolyte in there or some acid, that's how you can dissolve gold, and you can do things with the gold powder that you recover from it, right? Now, normally I don't like to stray outside of academic sources, but there is a YouTuber who has a video on the Baghdad Battery. Yeah, it's not an academic source, but this guy is an electrical engineer, so I think he knows what he's talking about. I'm going to share it with you. It's Mehdi, who has a channel called Electro Boom. If you haven't seen it, you need to, because it's hilarious. But he has a
guy that purposely shocks himself.
Yeah, he electrocutes himself all the time.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's nuts.
He burns himself. He's just like, oh, I'll just touch this live wire, and it's hilarious. He's great. He's very entertaining. But he does a great video on the Baghdad Battery, and even if it could function as a battery, one of the things that he points out is, like, unless the ancient peoples who made it knew about how electricity works, it's not a battery, because the theory isn't there. That's not what they made it for, right? What about Easter Island? Who's heard of Easter Island? I mean, Easter Island is a big one.
That's with the heads.
Yeah, the giant heads.
Yeah.
Why would von Daniken claim that aliens are involved? Andrea knows about Easter Island as well. I mean, those are some big heads, right? How did they move them? They even go underground, like they've been buried a bit, such that some of those heads are like actually covered in a lot of like soil and stuff now. Yeah, exactly. How could these ancient people carve these big rocks, big stones, and transport them? Same with Stonehenge or ancient Egypt. It's probably the number one impetus for ancient astronaut theories is construction. How did the ancient people who didn't have the technology that we have, they didn't have heavy machinery, how did they make and move these big objects? Well, in the case of Easter Island, I'm not sure, but I know that in the case of ancient Egypt, and in the case of Stonehenge, we have a pretty good idea of the kinds of things they would have to do. The pyramids are made of limestone. Limestone, sandstone, stuff like that. I agree, Andrea. It's a huge insult to ancient human ingenuity. And as we'll get to in a moment, it's also kind of racist, because von Daniken is actually, there's a pattern there in who he thinks had help from aliens and who didn't. So we'll get to that though. But say I'm in ancient Egypt, I got to cut some sandstone. I don't have tools. I do have tools, but I only have copper tools. So this is the Bronze Age. I've got copper. I don't have iron. So how do I cut a brick or a block at perfect angles, so nice and perfect the way the pyramids are? Well, I can use a copper saw. And you're like, what? Copper's really soft. Yes, it is. But if I drop sand in the slot with my saw, the saw moves those grains of sand, and the grains of sand act like the teeth of a saw. And that will allow me to cut clean through a piece of rock, a piece of sandstone or limestone, with nothing but copper tools. From there, using a whole lot of people power, I can move that by boat to Giza, where it can be moved and placed. It's really not, it's really not that crazy. I imagine something similar was done with Easter Island. I imagine something similar was done with Göbekli Tepe. That's a really cool ancient site. Göbekli Tepe is in modern day Turkey, and it's probably one of the oldest monolithic sites we know about. And the stones are huge, yet people were able to move them. It just took a lot of work. So ancient Egypt, I mean, the ancient Egyptians, the number one thing, the number one line of reason or line of evidence that I think ancient astronaut theorists fail to deal with is that the ancient Egyptians wrote everything down, absolutely everything. They were meticulous record keepers. There's no way they would not have written down help from some kind of alien civilization. That would be recorded somewhere, and it's not, right? The Nazca Lines are another example. The Nazca Lines are in South America. They're those animals that are drawn on this mountain plateau. There's like spiders and birds and different animals, and not just animals, but some straight lines that connect the different animal depictions, which some ancient astronaut theorists argued were runways. They might have been ancient runways, either for the alien craft or for the airplanes that the aliens helped the Nazca peoples build, I guess. I don't know. Okay, so I'm being really cheeky here. Like I'm like, okay, this is kind of like the one area where I'm not really afraid to pull my punches, because number one, I do believe that alien life is out there. I think it's just a numbers game. Number two, this isn't like religion where people are invested in this stuff. This is just like really bad science. So I'm not afraid to go after it. And it might seem like I'm being really cheeky here for those reasons. But yeah, let's get back to that point about how this is an insult to human ingenuity. I agree with that very, very strongly. What are all of your thoughts? And what are some other examples that you might have seen if you've read von Daniken's work, or if you've watched like Ancient Aliens? Maybe you put it on for a laugh. I do that sometimes. I put it on and it's hilarious. It's a hilarious show. But then I remember, oh wait, some people take this seriously. So what are some claims what are some other ancient alien claims, and how do they undermine or why are they insulting to our ancient ancestors? Well, Abby's got a good point. Technology dependent people think ancient societies were really dumb. I agree, that is whack. But this was a point that Sagan made in the previous episode of Cosmos that I asked you to watch. Like, and this was like I had that whole thing where I went on about how mind-blowing it was that people figured this out, the motions of the stars and planets, and figured out how to keep time. People figured this out. You know, the Mayan calendar, right? Remember a few years ago, or a decade ago now. Oh my God. Remember 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar? Oh, the end of the world, blah, blah, blah. Maybe
Yeah,
some of you.
John Cusack. Yeah,
Yeah, there was the
2012.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was the
Yeah.
movie, but there were people who were like, "Oh, this really means the end of the world." What it
All the
actually meant.
batteries and canned soup was sold out everywhere.
Yeah. Well, it was like I mean, okay, so I've had two apocalypses that I've lived through: Y2K and 2012. So I remember them both. Y2K was just kind of funny. But 2012 was interesting. So that wasn't really the end of the world, according to the Mayan calendar. It was just the start of another cycle in the Mayan calendar. But the point I'm trying to make here is that a culture without writing came up with a calendar that was pretty much the most accurate calendar in the world. It like more accurate than the Gregorian calendar that the Europeans would have been using around the same time. Way more accurate. That's crazy. Like, holy moly. I'm just flabbergasted. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing that ancient people were able to figure out the stuff that they were able to. But maybe it's not that amazing when you realize that a lot of this was a matter of survival. You had to keep time. And if you believed that that nature was really governed by gods and spirits, if you were an animist, then you need to know what to do to make sure the gods don't come and get you. And a lot of times this is either animal or human sacrifice, or ritual, some kind of ritual, prayers, stuff like that. The ancient peoples of Mesoamerica did a lot of human sacrifice. So did a lot of people in Europe. I mean, von Daniken leaves out. He kind of leaves out Europeans from his ancient astronaut hypotheses, I guess, because racism. But there was definitely human sacrifice going on in Europe. Whether you want to talk about the Germanic peoples, they did lots of human sacrifice, lots of it. Every 9 years, all the Vikings would go to Uppsala in Sweden, right? And they would sacrifice 9 of every kind. So 9 goats, 9 dogs, I don't know, 9 people sacrifice humans. Or the Romans. Forget about those crazy barbarians from up north. How about the Romans? The Romans loved to go to the Colosseum and reenact some battles. Whoa, what's happening? What's going on here?
Josh, are you here? Can you hear us? You're muted.
Yeah, you're on mute right now, Professor.
The aliens took away his ability to speak.
Okay. Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
That's okay.
Sure you don't.
So when did we lose contact?
I don't even remember what we were discussing.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
That's fine. And why does Zoom look like this now? That's not how I want it to look. View. Full screen. Oh, that's not right. Oh, it's because I'm not sharing my screen anymore. There. Okay. Sorry. Technical difficulties. I think I was saying
You were talking about 9 of something.
Oh, it was the Romans. We're talking about Romans.
Oh, right.
sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess my go-to example of human sacrifice in Europe is the sacrifice by the Germanic peoples, which we know most recently from Scandinavian folklore and Old Norse stuff, just because that they were the last ones to become Christians. But even if you go to some place that was more civilized, like the Romans, civilized, yeah, right, they're throwing Christians to the lions, and that's their entertainment. They'll reenact battles where gladiators who were slaves fight to the death, right? So yeah, human sacrifice is all over the place. So yeah, that's why I think von Daniken is his views are the best thing I could say about them is that they're biased. At worst, they're just outright out. Oh, that there's a Freudian slip. Outright racist. Yeah, he is. So for example, von Daniken does not appeal to ancient astronaut theory to explain anything that the Greeks or the Romans did. But he does do it to explain, ancient Egypt, the Nazca Lines, Easter Island. Why? I mean, why were the Greeks able to build wonderful temples? Why were the Romans? I mean, the Romans, talk about ancient technology. The Romans, man, concrete, aqueducts, the Colosseum. The ancient Greeks and Romans were so close to a scientific revolution like the one that took place in Europe. It just didn't happen. Why? I don't know. Yeah, those Gauls. It's always those barbarians, man, with their pants. Like, yeah. They did, yeah. Because, if you're an animist and the gods are capricious, you need to appease them somehow, right? They had, the stairs up their pyramids, blood would flow down. It was very metal, I imagine. But yeah, the Mayans were, man, I wouldn't want to mess with ancient Mayan peoples.
Did ancient aliens take away the Mayan people? What happened to them?
Well, actually, it's really interesting. It seems to be a case of deforestation. The Mayans sort of didn't really disappear, but their empire collapsed because the ecosystem that they depended on sort of collapsed because of overlogging, I guess, too much deforestation. And indeed, descendants of the Mayans they still exist, right? It's not like they're all gone. They're just not ancient Mayans anymore, but their ancestors still exist, right? So yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that's kind of problematic about von Daniken, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, he doesn't appeal to ancient aliens to explain what the Greeks and the Romans did, but he does with pretty much everyone else. Why? I mean, I think that's, at the very least, incredibly biased. But what are everyone's thoughts?
I feel like he appeals to a lot of people because ancient aliens, I think, kind of tries to come off as scientific when it isn't, and he doesn't, kind of more hokey in that sense, and it appeals to a broader public. I think people that listen or watch ancient aliens, they think, okay, we've got the inside scoop, or there's more empirical analysis here, and that's not the case at all.
I suppose, yeah. It definitely, and shows like this are presented like documentaries, which, just that format lends it credibility in the eyes. Head. Yeah, a talking head. Yeah. And they can put Okay, so the best example is from an episode of South Park, which actually satirized ancient aliens. Have you guys seen that episode?
Is it Thanksgiving one?
Yeah, it's the Thanksgiving one.
Yeah. Okay.
Where it's Thor, but it's John Smith instead, right? Like, so it was so silly, a very silly episode. But yeah, they're doing a documentary on. They have to do a project on Thanksgiving, so they watch the History Channel, and it's just ancient aliens talking about how there's a more extraterrestrial explanation for the origins of Thanksgiving. American Thanksgiving, I mean, like with the Pilgrims and the Native American. Canadian Thanksgiving's actually, the origins are a little different, of course. But and then the History Channel comes and interviews like Stan and Kyle and Kenny. And they, they're like, they put little like, Kyle Broflovsky, professor of Thanksgiving, DeVry Institute. Like, this is the exact, it's the exact thing that the ancient aliens people are doing. The talking head, the non-expert. Other thoughts? Either on particular claims or on things overall?
Why do you even classify someone as an expert? Because yeah, literally, you could, Alexis. Okay, I'll shut up.
I'd say years of study, but
okay.
Go ahead,
Years of study.
Alexis.
Yeah.
No, 100% finish what you're discussing. This is like something separate.
Okay, yeah. What is an expert? Well, I would say years of study, but years of studying properly and the right way and demonstrating your expertise. No, I mean, that's what you have to do when you get your undergraduate degree. You have to pass all your stuff. You get your master's, you have to defend a thesis. You get a PhD, you have to defend an even more important thesis. And that proves that you can do what you say you can do and that you know what you know, right?
That Vice video you sent was a good example too. The one in the Discord about how like the media wanted to skew or like wanted to play this narrative, and they wanted people to be like so-called experts, and it's just ridiculous. Yeah. About a bunch of balloons with flares.
Yeah. And this is not unique to pseudoscience. There are a lot of pseudo experts out there. All over the place.
Artists. Yeah.
Well, pickup artists are a particularly gross example. I'm thinking of like your Dr. Oz, your Jordan Peterson, these folks. But anyway, Alexis has had her hand up for a bit. So go ahead, Alexis, and then Dahlia, go ahead after Alexis.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, going back to our discussion before, just about you're asking, why this perception is held that, the Greeks and the Romans didn't, have help from aliens, but other civilizations did. And since we're talking about racism is present in different forms, right? It takes different shapes and everything. So I would say like this is probably like another example of, you could say it's a bit of colonialism as well, and thinking that it's kind of like the white man's burden kind of thing, where they're saying if there was no present like evidence of white people being in Egypt or any other civilizations at that time, then of course aliens had to be the ones to help them and advance the civilization because people couldn't do it themselves, which is clearly false. But since it was in Greece and Rome, then since it's in Europe, they're like, oh, of course, they were able to do it by themselves. They had their own human ingenuity, whereas the other civilizations didn't, and they required help. So it's kind of like that idea right now.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. Like, and it is like big colonial energy from thinkers when they say, well, we know how the Greeks did what they did. Look, they had geometry and everything, but the ancient Egyptians, how could they have built it? I mean, come on, give people credit. I mean, we say nowadays ancient Egypt here in the 21st century. Egypt was ancient in ancient Greece, right? Like, to the Greeks, Egypt was old. So like, come on. They and the Greeks borrowed heavily from ancient Egypt and Persia. So it's like, come on, the Greeks didn't do this in a vacuum, neither did anybody else. And the Romans just took a lot of the Greek ideas for themselves anyway. So yeah, it's like when people are like, oh yeah, clearly the aliens helped the Mayans or the Egyptians build the pyramids, but not the Greeks with their temples. I'm like, really? Like, I think that just tells me that you have this antiquated kind of outlook on how people work and what civilizations have been able to do. I mean, geez, half of the advances that we take for granted that we often associate with the European scientific revolution came from the ancient Islamic world during the Islamic Golden Age. And that stuff in turn had come from not just the Greeks, but the Persians, the Indians. I mean, come on, like cultural exchange. It's cultural exchange, right? Dahlia, go ahead.
Well, now I have two things because what you just said with cultural exchange, I think one of the best ways to show how like there is like when people try to argue that ideas exist in a vacuum, like you said, or that like they were created by one group in a cloistered environment, you can be like, that doesn't make any sense. And historically, we can prove that by like countries that built walls. So like when China built the wall, the Great Wall of China, they were like this thriving country that like just had everything. They were totally self-sufficient. So they were like, we're going to build a wall. And then when they were invaded, they were still using gunpowder for fireworks and not guns.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
So you need to catch up with the world. Everybody's not going to be at the same light speed if you're not exchanging ideas. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. And also, it speaks to the point that civilizations, wherever and whenever they are, they tend to rise and fall, and things get not only shared but also rediscovered, right? But that's a great point about the gunpowder. Yeah. Just this idea that it's kind of like the idea that, oh, it's okay, we're at the end of history, so we don't have to worry about anything. We'll just put up a wall and live. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was the idea. And that's also my favorite thing to bring up when everybody was like, when the big like wall in the United States, the build a wall thing was like such a big conversation. That was my favorite thing to bring up, to be like, guys, the walls don't work.
Yeah. Walls do not work. And Trump's wall was a terrible wall anyway, because it didn't even get finished, and the wind was blowing parts of it over, and like, man, the less said about that guy, the better, though.
No wonder of the world.
No. Anyway. What was the other thing you wanted to say?
The other thing is borderline irrelevant, but I think it's interesting. It's, if you want, like, I don't know, a good laugh, go watch this YouTube channel called Middle Ground. I
know it.
It's like, no, right? It's Jubilee is the YouTube channel, and then Middle Ground is the series on Jubilee.
Yeah, oh man, I have a love-hate
one on UFOs.
Oh,
there's
cool.
one on UFOs. It is so much fun. I watched it like a week ago. I like to watch them with my dad.
I'll have to check it out.
It's a good one.
It's not, and no, I don't think that's irrelevant. Those are like, man, that show, like, I get it. Their whole, if you're not familiar with their channel, their whole thing is radical empathy. Like, but they give platforms to people they just shouldn't be giving platforms to, right? And it's harmless enough when it's like alien UFO people versus skeptics, or flat earthers versus scientists. But I don't know. I think they give a platform to, like, they'll do a thing like, they'll do like a debate on transgender issues, and they'll have maybe some trans and non-binary people, and then a bunch of like gender critical bigots. And I'm like, why are you? No, there aren't two sides to this, you know, or they'll have like, you know, racists versus non-racists. And it's like, no, there aren't two sides. So, you know, sometimes yeah. Anyway, what's the next slide say? I will watch the UFO one because that's funny. That's interesting.
It's
Yeah,
about as fun as the Flat Earthers one.
Sorry?
It's as fun as the Flat Earthers one.
Yeah, okay, good. Because the Flat Earthers one was, yeah. And yes, I was actually going to share this in the Discord, Jean-Francois. If any of you guys have not seen any of Andrew Callahan's work, he started, well, he hit it big on YouTube with All Gas, No Breaks. There was a deal with, some deal with Adult Swim that kind of didn't really work out in their favor. So now he's doing a new channel called Channel 5, but it's the same thing. It's just gonzo journalism, very meme heavy, just talking to anybody. And it's hilarious, but it's also pretty interesting journalism. Like I really enjoy it. And everybody should check this one out. Also check out the Flat Earth Convention or the Alien Con. They're all very interesting. Okay, so ancient aliens, right? These claims are not new. In previous iterations of this class, I had people watch a documentary called In Search of Ancient Astronauts, which was a part of a series called In Search of. It was kind of like one of these unexplained mysteries sorts of series, right? So this episode aired in 1977, and Von Daniken isn't interviewed, but his ideas are featured very heavily, ideas that he published in Chariots of the Gods, his book. So, you know, I guess I'm just saying here that Chariots of the Gods, I find it really funny that, like, what's that doing there? That's really the title of the book. The title of the book is not Chariots of the Gods, it's Chariots of the Gods? What's wrong with that? What's the problem with that? I mean, you ever get that argument, like, you ever hear somebody say, hey, I'm just asking questions? Who says that? What kind of people say that? Or not what kind of people, but like, anybody got an example of people who say those kinds of things?
Buttheads.
But I was gonna say people need to wear a helmet sometimes. So
And who else said what?
I said buttheads.
Buttheads.
I
Yeah.
also wrote like people being like, I'm playing devil's advocate. Like that's not, no one wants to hear it.
Bad faith actors. Steven Crowder, exactly. Steven Crowder. A bad faith actor if there ever was one. Joe Rogan. I'm an idiot. I don't know. But do COVID vaccines work? I'm just asking questions. You know? It's like, I saw this meme on Twitter a few weeks ago, like 9 out of 10 dentists recommend flossing. And Joe Rogan's like, who's that 10th guy? Sounds like he's got some ideas. We need to get him on the podcast. Like, that's Joe Rogan in a nutshell. Ben Shapiro too. All those people, all of whom I would characterize as bad faith actors. What does that mean? Oh, you're muted.
I say acting in bad faith, like they're preaching the bad, like the stuff they know is wrong, poisoning the public discourse. Yeah. Just to get ahead.
Just to make money. Kind of like how I imagine the sophists of ancient Greek writing, you know, why did Socrates hate the sophists? Well, they charge money for their teachings and they make the weaker argument the stronger. Basically, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Steven Crowder, all those guys. They're modern day sophists. when you're a bad faith actor, yeah, you poison public discourse. And that's what this does to science. Like Chariots of the Gods, I'm just asking questions. Now I have plausible deniability. I can just say, well, I'm not making any claims. I'm just asking questions. Yeah, but you're still making millions off the sale of a pseudoscientific book, which espouses theories that say, black and brown people couldn't build ancient monuments. They needed the help of aliens. Like, okay, enjoy that money, I guess. There's just something that's just something gross about that. To me, as a philosopher and a scientist, like somebody who's interested in the truth, right? And it may seem harmless enough when it's ancient aliens, but when it comes to stuff that really affects people's lives, and this is the problem with your Petersons and your Shapiros and your Crowders, right? Because they're actually, they're not talking about ancient aliens. They're talking about stuff that affects people's lives. It affects women, affects trans people, affects racial minorities, they're pushing stuff that actually damages people's lives and well-being under the guise of just asking questions. So I really don't like this frickin' question mark right here. So yeah, just keep all this in mind. It's a lot of pseudoscience. Now on to Carl Sagan, who is awesome, who is the anti-Von Daniken. And my God, the world needs a Carl Sagan right now. We have some good science communicators, but they're all a bunch of downers. I mean, really, this is my opinion, okay? You don't have to agree with my opinion. But there was this childlike wonder that Sagan had, that he brought. He made you have it. It was infectious. And I don't see very many science popularizers who have that gift nowadays. A lot of them are just kind of grumpy. Like Richard Dawkins. He just seems so grumpy. Who else? Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's good, but he's always like, oh, this movie was dumb because it was scientifically implausible, and it's like, oh, here comes Neil deGrasse Tyson to ruin my favorite science fiction movie again. Like, Bill Nye's good, I guess. I got to see Bill Nye live. That was really cool. It was years ago. He did a talk at the University of Ottawa, and my partner and I went and saw it, and I was just like, this is so cool. But Sagan, the world needs its Carl Sagans with all of these, all the Jordan Petersons and all those idiots that we have. The world needs a Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan, as I talked about last time, he was an American astronomer and a science communicator. Not only was he an early advocate for nuclear disarmament and tackling climate change, which was known as global warming at the time, he was also an advocate, an anonymous advocate for medical and recreational cannabis. I wonder if anybody's heard of Mr. X. Maybe not. It's a little bit obscure. Way back in the day, there was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard University named Lester Grinspoon. Lester Grinspoon's son had cancer. He was a young boy, and the story that Grinspoon tells is that while his son was undergoing chemotherapy, he would become violently ill. And this is something that a lot of people going through chemo experience, incredible nausea, such that they can't eat, they can't keep a meal down. So Grinspoon tried cannabis. So his son would smoke a little bit of cannabis before chemotherapy, and it completely obliterated his nausea. And that's why, if you're on chemo, you can still, to this day, you can get prescription medical cannabis because it does help with nausea. It's one of the things that it does. It's also good for glaucoma if you have glaucoma because it reduces the intraocular pressure of the vitreous humor in your eyes. So Sagan was a recreational user of cannabis. And Lester Grinspoon wrote a very influential book, very popular book, very sort of like against the current at the time book called Marijuana Reconsidered, which was kind of inspired, I guess, in a sense, by how medical cannabis helped his son, who unfortunately didn't survive. But his life was made a lot easier, the remainder of his life, by medical cannabis. So Grinspoon writes this book called Marijuana Reconsidered, where he argues that we've got this all wrong. Marijuana is not this drug that's, you know, the corrupter of youth, you know, reefer madness. You know, this was, you've probably seen clips of reefer madness on the internet. There were dozens of propaganda films like this. I mean, marijuana was demonized more than any other substance had ever been up to that point. Certainly more than alcohol and prohibition, I would argue. And Sagan made a contribution to that book as Mr. X. He wrote an anonymous essay that was part of that book, where he said, like, I am a respected American scientist and I use cannabis, and here's the benefits. So Carl Sagan, it was not unveiled until after his death in 1996 that he was Mr. X. So that's pretty cool. As I said last time, he made important contributions to planetary astronomy by applying spectroscopy to looking at the atmospheres of different planets in the solar system. And this is probably the coolest thing. Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson were in his astronomy class at Cornell. So Bill Nye is an engineer who studied at Cornell. Neil deGrasse Tyson did his undergrad at Cornell. And Sagan was their astronomy teacher. How freaking cool would that have been? Like, wow. Carl Sagan was my astronomy teacher. Man, I wish I could say that. But I can't. Although my astronomy teacher was pretty awesome too. And a challenger of pseudoscience and a skeptic of paranormal claims, especially those to do with alien abduction and ancient astronaut theorists. The episode that you will have watched is from Cosmos, A Personal Voyage. I showed you the book last time. It was written by Sagan, his wife, Ann Druyan, produced by Steven Soder. It premiered on CBS, and I think to this day is still probably one of the most viewed documentaries in the history of documentary TV. It's been viewed by over 500 million people in 60 different countries. I watched it, so I'm told, when I was a young kid, although I don't remember it. But there are pictures of me that my parents have drawing planets on my little chalkboard that I had, and like drawing diagrams of the solar system when I was like 4 or 5. I don't remember this, but there's photographs, so I guess, yeah. And then I watched it later again. I sort of rediscovered it as an undergraduate. When I just fell in love with it. And I know it's old, okay? Like, I know. I'm asking you to watch this thing from the 1980s. It's got, the picture quality is not great. The soundtrack is very of its time, although I'd still say it's a great soundtrack. It's Vangelis, who passed away recently. He was a really cool composer. He made a lot of contributions to electronic music. So, you know, this stuff sounds very old and silly maybe, but without this, we wouldn't have a lot of the music that we have today. And this particular episode is called the Encyclopedia Galactica. And I think we should take a quick break before we come back and discuss the episode and discuss the UAP report. So what do you say? It's 3:47 now. What do you say we break until about 4, come back, and we'll discuss this episode and discuss the UAP report seminar style. All right, let's do that. So I'm going to pause recording. And I'll see you all in about 13-ish minutes. All right. Recording paused. I have resumed recording. I was just reading this from the Telegraph. Did anyone see this? It isn't to do with aliens, but it is to do with the class. I'll read you the headline. Okay. Existence of Loch Ness Monster is plausible after fossil discovery. It's not what you think. It makes it sound like, we found a fossil in Loch Ness, might be a pliosaur. Ooh. No, it's not that. River system dig in modern day Morocco offers controversial new perspective on how marine reptiles and aquatic dinosaurs coexisted. The article is about, so Andrea saw it, yeah. So this is interesting because what the article actually discusses is that a major point against the Loch Ness Monster being a pliosaur, this is a type of, it's not a dinosaur, it's a pliosaur, a sea reptile, lived in salt water, that had fins, a short tail, and a long neck. You know, your stereotypical sea monster looking aquatic dinosaur. It's a pliosaur. One of the points against Nessie being a pliosaur, as opposed to not real, or as opposed to or whatever, is that pliosaurs were believed to only live in salt water, and Loch Ness was always fresh water. But these fossils that were discovered in Morocco are apparently of freshwater pliosaurs. And for that reason, one of the scientists who was interviewed said that for that reason, the Loch Ness Monster is plausible, because, now all of a sudden we know that there were pliosaurs that lived in fresh water. That's like saying Bigfoot is plausible because we know Gigantopithecus has lived on land. Okay, doesn't make it any more plausible. We have no pliosaur fossils after the KT boundary. That's the boundary of the Cretaceous mass extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous period, when the asteroid hit the Earth and created a global winter, covered in ash and dust for a year. It killed all the plant life, and all the dinosaurs except for the some of the theropods went extinct, and of course those evolved into birds. Yeah, so this is kind of why I say the world needs a Carl Sagan. I can't believe I'm reading this. I mean, honestly, I'm going on Twitter. I got the Loch Ness Monster is plausible trending. I got Jordan Peterson trending. There'll be some election fraud nonsense from the States trending, some Freedom Convoy stuff trending. And as I keep saying, this is all harmless enough if you're talking about going Bigfoot hunting with your friends. But the same patterns of thinking behind cryptozoology can contribute to some very destructive, very toxic discussions. So if you want to question whether aliens have visited the Earth or something, fine. But now we've got people questioning the rights of groups of people, not just questioning, but actively removing rights, especially right now in the States. I mean, the disenfranchisement of racial minorities, particularly Black people, has always been a problem. Roe v. Wade is no more. Women's reproductive rights are under attack. Trans people have always been under attack. And a lot of when you dig into this stuff, and you really have to mentally prepare yourself if you go down these rabbit holes, because the stuff you find is just a mixture of bad thinking and hatred. And it's, I have to limit my time on Twitter because, I'm interested in understanding how these ideas spread. But after a while, I have to stop because I start getting angry, you know, and I'm just like, so yeah, that's, I guess, one of the reasons why it's important to be critical and skeptical, right? I mean, it's one thing if it's just a pet belief you have, but when it comes to how people's lives are affected, like what people's agendas are, I mean, the stuff is, you don't want to mess around with this stuff, right? I guess I better share my screen and we can get back to aliens. So I saw a few hands go up for who saw the documentary. I hope all of you did watch it or will watch it because it's good. And if you really are into if you really like it, it's always good to watch the whole series. It's a fantastic series. But in this particular episode, Sagan recounts the Hill abduction case, which is a very famous account of a close encounter of the third kind, where the Hills, Betty and Barney Hill, claimed that they had been taken up into the spaceship of some alien visitors. So I'm curious, what are everybody's thoughts on this case and what you learned about it from this particular episode? Alexis.
Well, okay, one, I really enjoyed hearing about it because I wasn't aware of this particular case. And I think in general, the most I know about Eddie sort of phenomena similar to this is from the X-Files. So I feel like it was some of the things that they were saying were very similar to what they were saying in the episodes. But I actually just had a quick question.
Sure.
One of them was actually what you were just mentioning about the third kind. I was wondering I didn't know that there were different kinds of experiences that you could have with aliens. So if that's the third kind, are there the first kind and the second kind?
There is a first and second, but I'm not sure, I'm going to have to look it up because I'm not entirely sure who this classification system is due to. So hang on a sec, we'll have a look here. So close encounters are, this is a term from ufology, which is the study of UFOs. Terminology was put forward by astronomer and UFO researcher J. Allen Hynek. Okay. So there's a scale. An encounter of the first kind would be a visual sighting of a UFO less than 500 feet away, so that you can see considerable detail. A second kind would be, let's see, this is all Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt, but a UFO event in which a physical effect is alleged, animals barking, your electronics start going haywire, maybe there's a crop circle or some effect, something like this. And the third kind is when the beings present themselves. They could take you into their spaceship or just come out of their spaceship and say, hello, take me to your leader. So that's the classification system. It's a way of ranking reports. And the Hills is the third kind because it is claimed again that they were taken up into the spaceship and the aliens kind of gave them a tour. They were like, oh, here's some star charts. Here's Earth. Here's where we are. We're from over here. And, just kind of showed them around the spaceship a bit. There was no probing or anything untoward like that, apparently. So, yeah.
No, I found it also interesting since you're mentioning that part as well. I think her name was Betty, right? Who was taken up into the ship with her husband or the couple.
Betty and Barney, that's right.
Yeah. So I thought it was really interesting when Sagan was mentioning that, if you were to draw the pattern of the constellation of the star map, then of course it would look it would resemble the one that was the second copy of it, the second version. But then he said you could draw the same or a different pattern with the same constellations, it would look completely different. And he showed the other examples of it. So I thought that was really cool about being skeptical of what evidence you're given. Of course it would look very similar because they just pretty much traced it almost onto the second copy. Yeah. So of course it would be very similar.
And not only that, but they were able to select from a huge number of pictures and vantage points, the one that best fit. Sagan himself says, like, I'm surprised nobody could find a better match, you know. But that the interesting thing with the lines is arguably apophenia, the tendency to see patterns where there are none. And we can see this when Sagan took all of the lines that were superimposed off of the two images, they looked nothing alike all of a sudden, right? So that's very interesting too. So thank you for raising that point. Yeah. Any other thoughts on the Hill abduction case?
Where were they coming home from? They were in a car.
Yeah,
was this like a party or something?
They were returning to the United States from Canada.
Right.
I think they were visiting family in Eastern Canada and then driving back somewhere in New England. And already that's kind of interesting, because what happens when you're driving for a really, really long time? You get tired. Driving is cognitively demanding, right? In the video, Barney is driving. I don't know if they took turns, if they stopped. I don't know. And I also don't drive. So, but I imagine that I know that, you know, my girlfriend, she drives, and we go on a road trip and we get where we're going. She has a nap, you know, because it's draining. You have to pay attention 5, 6, 7 hours at a time. That's demanding. So when you get tired, you know, stuff can happen. You can maybe drift asleep. You could see things that aren't really there. You're definitely more susceptible to illusions, like perceptual illusions, especially at night, right?
And that's what the psychiatrist was saying too, right? Like after like the hypnotic, like the hypnotic environment that they were in, when they were able to recall memories, he was like, it's very much resembling like a dream state, right?
A dream, yeah. Their psychiatrist did attribute it to a dream, but there's also, I'm glad you raised the point about hypnosis, because there's a problem with that. Does anybody know the problem with using hypnosis this way?
Doesn't it only work on people that want it to work? No.
Well, it's true. Some people are more susceptible to hypnosis. So a lot of people think hypnosis.
Implant memories.
Yeah, implant, as
yeah,
Abby
says it. Yeah.
A lot of people think hypnosis is bunk, and it's not. But it's also not what people think it is. It's not like the hypnotist has unlimited control over the person who's hypnotized. But some people are more suggestible, and that's really all hypnosis is putting someone in a relaxed state where they're open to suggestion. If we were in person, there's a trick you can do that where I glue your fingers together with hypnosis that I could do, but I don't think it'll work when we're not in person, so I can't do it. But with a suggestion, there's a thing that you can do that gets people's fingers stuck together, but it's all them, it's all the person. It's just, I'm making a suggestion and I'm using what you're experiencing to make you think that I'm in control, when really you're just doing what I say. It's a trick of the mind. But as Abby says, yes, under hypnosis, the therapist can inadvertently implant memories, right? Or sometimes the person under hypnosis is reconstructing a false memory. So memories recovered under hypnosis have been shown to be very unreliable. And that's another problem with the Hills case, is that they both kind of woke up remembering something having happened, but not exactly what happened. And it was only under hypnosis later, like weeks after the event, that we get the story that they were taken up into an alien spaceship by these gray aliens with big eyes and no mouths or whatever, right? So that's exactly right. And false memory, even when we're not talking about hypnosis, that's a worry, right? Human memory is not perfect. Even people with very good memories are susceptible to false memories. Sometimes you hear talk like this is a trope in fiction. So-and-so has an eidetic memory or a photographic memory. These don't exist. right? That's not how memory works. There are savants who have memories that are so good that it seems like they have a photographic memory, but it's not literally like a picture in the mind. That's not how it works. And every time we recollect something, it runs the risk of being altered just by virtue of being recalled. So human memory is very unreliable. So we need to be skeptical of first-person accounts. Nowadays, when a lot of people report that they've been abducted, it is actually when they are falling asleep or during the night or when they're waking up. And that is very curious. Why would that be?
It's like has to do with like the stages of, wakefulness, right? Like, beta, alpha,
Yeah.
theta, gamma, all those.
Yeah, we go through different stages of sleep. And yeah, as Abby says, sometimes a curious phenomenon called sleep paralysis happens. And we're going to talk about this more in our lecture on dreams. But sleep paralysis is very interesting. It happens to a lot of people. See, when you're dreaming, you're in REM sleep, and your brain is pretty much as active as it is when you're awake. Your brain is building a world model the same way it does when you're awake, except when I'm awake, I have all of this information coming in from my senses that allows me to build this model of the world. When I'm dreaming, I don't have that. I have only memories, expectations, thoughts, concepts. And so I build a sort of completely offline world model. While this is happening, your body is paralyzed because it would be maladaptive if we got up and acted out our dreams, So that's why when you're dreaming, you might see people's eyes moving and their respiration rate changing. You can see this if you have a pet. Here's my dog. She's asleep now. I would say right now, she's probably not dreaming because she's not twitching. Hey, Toots, are you even asleep? Tula, are you asleep? You asleep? Okay, she's asleep. But she's hi. Hi. You're not sleeping. So, but when you see your dog or your cat dreaming and they're kind of like, twitching and doing that because they're paralyzed, so they don't act out their dreams. But sometimes it can happen that you partially awaken and you remain paralyzed and you're awake, but your brain is still dreaming, and you can experience these very vivid hallucinations. So you might wake up in your bedroom and find that you're unable to move. And so maybe you think like, oh man, the aliens are coming. Like they're going to get me. They've already paralyzed me. And then because you thought of aliens, all of a sudden you see maybe a spaceship or a light out the window. And all of a sudden you're back in a dream, dreaming you've been abducted by aliens. And these can seem very real. If you've ever had a lucid dream or a false awakening, you know that those can feel like eerily real, right? Like when I have lucid dreams, I don't even do anything except like stop and like, wow, this is all in my mind. Like, look at this. This feels so real. But it's all offline. My brain's just generating this. And it's weird. It's unnerving. So imagine having that experience, except you were taken up into a spacecraft or visited by a ghost or a demon or something. It would feel very real. And I imagine if you didn't know what was happening, you'd be quite scared. So that's another thing that can explain alien abductions, because most alien abductions happen when we're in bed. Or most reports of alien abductions happen when people are in bed, either falling asleep, sleeping, or waking up. After this, Sagan talks about ancient Egypt, which I think is a nice touch because ancient astronaut theorists have a more extraterrestrial explanation for ancient Egypt. But Sagan just treats the ancient Egyptians how I think that the ancient Egyptians probably would have wanted been treated by people from the future. Like look at this incredible civilization that came up with this amazing writing system and built the pyramids and built all these temples. And you can get a sense of just how ahead of his time Sagan actually was in this documentary throughout the entire series. Anybody catch that in his discussion of ancient Egypt? He makes one quip, for example, about the Rosetta Stone, how it was found in the Egyptian village of Rashid. And he says, like, the Europeans in their persistence not to learn Arabic just called it Rosetta, you know? So like, it's the Rashid stone, or it should be the Rashid stone, but it's the Rosetta Stone because Napoleon's troops didn't want to learn Arabic. You know, it's kind of like that old joke about Tutankhamun, right? Like King Tutankhamun, King Tut, found in the 1920s, the most golden treasure ever found in an Egyptian tomb. And the joke goes, I think I heard it on like Crash Course World History or something, but it's like, you know, why did we find all this cool stuff in Tut's tomb, not in other tombs? Well, you know, all the other pharaohs had their tombs plundered by ancient people, and King Tut had his tomb plundered by 20th century British people. Really, like, it's just no one had found it until the 20th century. And now there's a lot of ancient Egyptian artifacts still in the British Museum, still in French museums, which I think really ought to go back to Egypt, because that's where the stuff was. You know, I think it's only fair. It's an unfortunate relic of colonialism again, you know. And heck, like, I want to go to Egypt one day. I'd love to see the pyramids. I don't want to have to go see the pyramids and then go to the British Museum to see a bunch of stuff in the British Museum. I want to go to Egypt and see it all. So, you know, that's what I say. But the really cool thing he does with ancient Egypt is use the example of Champollion, who figured out how to read the hieroglyphs. And I think that's just so cool, because if we really wanted to communicate with life out there, we'd be faced with a similar task, one-way communication, figuring out how do we talk to one another. And of course, how does Sagan think we would need to talk to aliens? How would we say we're here? Does anyone remember?
I remember, well, at least I remember he was talking about having like I think was it called an Interstellar Rosetta Stone, kind of like that. But then I don't know, the idea was really cool. But he's also talking about like the radio. Oh, I took a note on
that. Radio astronomy would be the practical means. But what would our Rosetta Stone be? It would have to be math.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right? The universal language, science, natural
science and math. Yeah. Because the laws of physics are the same everywhere in the universe. And we're going to have to assume that anybody out there who is advanced enough to communicate will have figured out at least as much as we have figured out. And they might have different ways of writing it. I mean, obviously, alien math would look different than Earth math, right? Even Earth math. How many different number systems have there been on Earth? Many, probably so many that we don't know about too, that may have been lost to history. Some cultures have incredibly simple number systems. The Yanomamo people of the Amazon only have 1, 2, and many, right? But in ancient India, they came up with the concept of 0, right? And Indian numbers eventually made their way to the home of Islam, which is why they're called Arabic numbers, but they're actually like really Indian numbers. And of course, they made it to Europe, and now we use Arabic numbers all over the world. But of course, the Romans and Greeks had their own number systems. Persians obviously did, Babylonians, Mesopotamians, in China, in Japan, different number systems, right? So tons of different number systems, tons of different ways of representing numerical relations. But because they're all representing numerical relations, we can figure out what we're saying, right? How would we do this? How would we let people know that we were here? Sagan suggests one surefire way, and that's prime numbers, because there's no natural phenomenon that produces series of prime numbers. Why prime numbers? Why not other numbers? And what are prime numbers anyway? Anybody remember elementary school math?
Yeah, prime numbers are like numbers that are only divisible by themselves, right? And they're
Yeah.
odd numbers usually.
Or by one.
Yes.
Or yeah. So one is interesting because one is neither 0 nor prime. 2 is prime, 3 is prime, 5, 7, 11 is my favorite because it's like a regular prime number. You don't see prime numbers where all the numerals are the same, right? 13, 17, 19, 23 was John Forbes Nash, you know, the beautiful mind guy. That was his favorite prime number. Screw that, 11's better. Anyway, prime numbers, yeah, they're divisible by 1 and themselves. And prime numbers are also the factors of all other numbers. So you take any number like 9, you can factor that out into primes. So primes that you'd have to multiply together to get another number. So prime numbers are pretty cool, actually, but there's no natural process that produces them. So why would we want to do that as opposed to some other signal? Does anyone know the story about how pulsars were discovered? Does anyone know what a pulsar is? Pulsars are very interesting celestial phenomena. So when a very massive star collapses, if it's massive enough, it can turn into a black hole. But if it's not that massive, but still really massive, it might turn into a neutron star. Neutron stars are interesting because they're made of neutrons all squished together, and their gravity is very dense. And from their poles, they emit radio energy, so that you get like almost like a beam coming out of each pole. Now, sometimes these pulsars rotate really fast. That's due to the conservation of angular momentum. You know, when a figure skater spins around and she or he has their arms outstretched, they spin slowly. But if they bring their arms in, they spin really, really fast. That's conservation of angular momentum. So you got a big giant star, it's turning slowly. But now you've squeezed all that mass into something that's like maybe a few kilometers across. So it spins like crazy. And stars are also tilted. They have an axis tilt just like the Earth. So a pulsar is a fast rotating neutron star whose beam shines on us, and they appear to blink very fast and very regularly. The first pulsar that was ever discovered was thought to be an extraterrestrial signal because it was so regular, just like bop, 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 like radio signals, so regular that it seemed artificial. But of course, we worked out that actually they were just neutron stars rotating very, very quickly, and the beam projecting from one of their poles was sweeping past us like the beam of a lighthouse, right? So that's a pulsar. So you know, we've detected funny signals like that before and wondered if it could be alien life. Pulsars, quasars. Quasars are quasi-stellar radio sources. Quasars are probably very old galaxies whose black holes in the center are still gobbling up lots of matter and shooting out radio waves. So these are billions of light years away, probably what a lot of galaxies looked like in the early days of the universe. But all of those are natural. But there's no natural astrophysical process that will give you 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. It doesn't happen. So if we ever saw that, we would have to conclude that the source is artificial, and probably buried it somewhere in there. At least this is the way Sagan would do it if he was trying to communicate with say, hey, we're here on Earth, probably encoded in those numbers would be some other stuff like, you know, here's pi, here's our number system, you know, here's some other cool math, here's the gravitational constant on Earth. We'd figure out a way to represent it and give them a way to figure it out. But you know, we've been trying to do this for a bit. We've been broadcasting radio signals for probably like just a tad over a century now.
They sent a Voyager, that golden probe or the golden disc.
Sagan was also, Sagan and Druyan also were responsible for that golden disc.
Okay. Yeah.
And it contains lots of sounds. It contains not just music, but sounds, human sounds, animal sounds. You know, the songs of humpback whales are on that disc, right? You know what Arthur C. Clarke said about the Voyager probes? He said this to Sagan's face too, which is crazy. Arthur C. Clarke, you know, 2001: A Space Odyssey, all that jazz. He says, I know what's going to happen to your probes, Carl. They're going to be overtaken by spacecraft from Earth and brought back and put in the Smithsonian before any aliens find them. You know, so Arthur C. Clarke, a bit of a pessimist about alien life, I suppose. You can find that on YouTube. It's great. It's a lot like Cosmos. It's an interview with Carl Sagan, Stephen Hawking, and Arthur C. Clarke called God, the Universe, and Everything Else. I found it on DVD at this old used DVD store in North Bay when I was an undergrad, like such a hipster find, but you can find it on YouTube. And again, it's great. So the Voyager probes are interesting. Will an alien ever find them? The Voyager probes are not even all the way out of the solar system. You know,
didn't Sagan say in the movie, like, oh no, he said something about like aliens traveling to see Earth, even just to visit us. I guess it's not about the probes, but he said it would take like, on an estimation, to be like 1 million planets or 1 million places where aliens could come from with advanced societies. And it would be like one. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Drake equation.
Yeah.
And
the 1% of the total planet, just to require the resources to send out all the spacecraft needed to see us.
And that number N could be as few as 10, or it could be in the millions, right? We don't know. The Drake equation, which Frank Drake, who was a colleague of Sagan's at Cornell University, that was his brainchild. And it's just a tool for guessing. But already since the release of that episode of Cosmos, we can make much better guesses. At the time that program was made, we had very good indirect evidence that most stars had solar systems, like had planetary systems, because we could observe the wobbles in the sun. Because, you know, you got to remember, the planets don't orbit the sun. The sun and the planets orbit the same center of gravity. So that means that when the planets are going around, they cause the sun to wobble a little bit. And we can detect that wobble. I still remember the day that it was confirmed the first extrasolar planet had been found. It was in the 90s, and I was in the back of a car, my mom's Hyundai, and it came on the radio, and I was like, whoa, that's sick. So that was awesome. Now, how many extrasolar planets do we know about? I don't know. I know it's in the thousands. I don't know the exact number. Let me Google it. Hey, Google, how many extrasolar planets are there?
According to Wikipedia, this is a list of exoplanets. As of the 1st of July 2022, there are 5,108 confirmed exoplanets in 3,779 planetary systems, with 826 systems having more than one planet.
So over 5,000 confirmed planets in nearly 4,000 systems That's insane. Like, so we can actually be a lot better with our Drake equation estimates now. We now know that most stars, these are just the ones that are confirmed, but if they're representative of other areas of the galaxy, most stars have planets, right? But there's other things that we still don't know about, like what's the percentage of planets that evolve life, that evolve intelligent life? What's the percentage of those that destroy themselves? I mean, in Sagan's day, it was the Cold War. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction meant that if there were to be a nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union, that would be the end of technological human civilization. And like Einstein said, I don't know the weapons with which World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Right? So, yeah. And now it's climate change and nuclear destruction, because, during the Cold War, the Americans and the Soviets at least talked to one another and tried not to start stuff from happening. Yeah, there were some close calls. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a close call. Operation Able Archer was a really dumb close call. The Western allies were doing nuclear drills, forgot to let the Soviets know that it was just a drill, and that may be the closest we've come to nuclear war in a while. But the thing is, like now, at least back in the day, at least I think the Soviets and Americans tried to keep the lines of communications open. That's not the case now. Putin is a dangerous individual, I'd say. Like, so this is weird. This is such a weird time to be alive. Like, I was born during the Cold War. The Cold War ended when I was like 4 years old, so I don't remember. But now it's like, oh, is this what that was like? Huh, I guess so, yeah. Kind of sucks. So, who knows? We may destroy ourselves. I really hope we don't, but look, a lot of maybe other alien societies have existed and they've destroyed themselves. Look what happened to the Mayans. They overfarmed and overlogged, and their climate, the local climate changed, and it couldn't support the massive cities that they lived in for all those years, So we always have to remember that, and that's Sagan's famous caveat that he always says when it comes to space exploration. If we do not destroy ourselves, we will one day venture to the stars. But why do we seem to be alone? If that's where Drake, that's where Sagan ends. The Drake equation means we can estimate that the number of intelligent spacefaring civilizations could be in the millions. But where are they?
Well, he did say that even if civilizations like that do exist, just because they do and they might be traveling doesn't necessarily mean that they'll come to us in the first place. Or if they do, doesn't necessarily mean that they even have to stop or anything. But even so, like what you were mentioning earlier, just like how he's very infectious with his his interest in this and everything, and in space and exploration. I was really getting, like, I was myself really intrigued when he's mentioning like the nervous system, like the part about like different colonies or different civilizations exploring, and then they might meet up with another one along the way and then keep exploring out, and it would take generations and generations. So yeah.
I mean, space is big. Even if there are millions of civilizations in the Milky Way, space is big, and the chance of one of these civilizations being within communication distance is actually pretty small. I mean, you say, oh, millions of civilizations, that's a lot. Well, there are like 400 billion stars in the galaxy. And by the way, we now know that the Milky Way is probably more larger than it was thought to be in Sagan's day. It was thought to be 60, 70,000 light years across. We now know that it's probably a bit bigger than that. Yeah, so even if let's say 200 years ago, an intelligent species arose on some planet within a few light years of Earth, they would have no reason to come here because we've just looked like any other place. We're not sending signals, right? So, or maybe we're the first ones. Or maybe all of the others have destroyed themselves.
What makes Earth special, right? You're saying that too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we want to think we're special, but we're not. You know, we're not in the center of the universe. You know, we're just some little rock orbiting an ordinary star, one of billions around this big giant galaxy, which is also one of billions. You know,
there are stars out there that are larger than our entire galaxy, through our solar system at least. Yeah, I remember.
Well, yeah, there are some very massive, not galaxy size, but there are some massive stars. But those stars, I don't think those stars would have solar systems. Or if they did, they would be like binary or trinary. It would be like multiple stars, right? But what those big giant stars do is they go supernova, and supernovas are very important for life. Why?
Because of the rapid expansion of molecular matter, and it's like the Big Bang all over again.
Supernovas are engines of creation. In the life of a star like our sun, eventually it runs out of hydrogen and begins fusing helium, runs out of helium and starts fusing heavier elements, all the way up to, I think for a star the size of our sun, all the way up to iron. In bigger stars, you might get heavier things being fused, like gold. Everything else on the periodic table can only be created in the massive fiery cauldron of a supernova explosion. Supernovas literally made the stuff that this planet is made out of. And us, the molecules that make us up. So supernovas are very important for life in the universe, at least life that's like us. There could be different kinds of life that we don't know about. We're carbon-based, maybe there's something else. But for carbon-based life forms, supernovas, very important. Well, let's just talk a little bit about the UAP report, because we are getting close to the end. So just before we switch over to get that, I'm glad some of you watched this, the video on faking a UFO. I thought this was a really interesting story. It sucks that they got charged with like misdemeanor something or other, misdemeanor disorderly conduct. So they got a fine and some community service, which I guess is fair, but also like, come on. Like, come on.
The media took it to a whole other level.
Yeah.
They were just kind of doing it for their own personal sake to see, oh, maybe we can turn a few heads, but it just, and they did engage, I guess they did call the media as well.
I think if they had not participated in that, it would have been probably fine. I wouldn't have done that. If I was to put together a hoax, I would just let it go and watch it happen. And I would do this. I better not actually do it now, because now I'm going to say my plans on the internet. So they'll know my plans if I ever do it. But in my hometown of North Bay, there's actually a lot of UFO sightings because the night skies are very clear and people see artificial satellites. There are also often, because it's right by Lake Nipissing, we get a lot of ice crystals in the air. And sometimes we get those strange light pillars at night, and people have taking pictures of those, and I see it in the local paper, like, oh, the Nugget, there's a UFO story in the North Bay Nugget again. So I always thought it would be cool to go back home and do a UFO hoax and just see what happens. I'd probably do what these guys did and use flares and balloons and stuff, but There's also the old NORAD base up there. So during the Cold War, that's where the nuclear missiles were. Yeah. Yeah, Canada had American nuclear missiles during the Cold War. A lot of people don't know that. But there's, if you're in North Bay and you're going down Lakeshore Drive, they've got one of them stuck up on a big display in the middle of a park. It's an old bomb arc missile from the Cold War. So yeah, that, just direct your attention to that if you haven't watched it already. Let's get out of the slideshow. I'll come back to that slide later. But let's open up that report, and it's not very long. I just kind of want to see where your attention was drawn here. Frozen.
Come on, cardboard and potatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need more potatoes. Or I should switch to lemons.
There we go.
So here we are. This is the UAP report. Why UAP? Well, the American government classifies these not as UFOs, but as unidentified aerial phenomena. And this is unclassified. The story behind this is really weird. Does anyone know how this came to be released? It's just weird. Okay, so when Trump was president, the American government has to pass a congressional budget to keep Congress going, and it's something they have to do all the time. They're constantly like, okay, here's how much money we need. Everybody's got to agree to it, and blah 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 blah. And for one of these rounds of congressional funding, Trump wouldn't sign off on it unless he got this report on unidentified aerial phenomena. And I think it was probably to do with the fact that he was also really pushing the Space Force, which, dumb name, first of all. And have you guys seen the logo for Space Force?
No, and I heard they have a really funny term for their pilots or something, or the people that are in the Space Force. It's like guardians or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
They have a symbol or a logo that looks like the Starfleet insignia from Star Trek. Like lazy freaking design. You know, I think we shouldn't call it Space Force. I think maybe we should just call it the Starfleet. That sounds cool. You know, like, oh, I'm joining Starfleet. I've always wanted to say that. So that's how this got released, because Trump was like, okay, I'm not going to sign off on this latest round of congressional funding unless the Pentagon agrees to deliver this unclassified report. And that's probably the one thing. This might be the one positive thing in the entire Trump presidency. You know, not that I'm like, yay, I'm so glad. No, though that was a mess. That whole 4 years felt like I was living in a satirical television program. So yeah, that was weird. But this is a report. And yeah, did everybody read it? And if you did, what did you think?
I think for me, I was really surprised by just how much, I guess, they put into investigating UAPs, or other terms would just be UFOs, like all the terminology that they have to, and all the different types of like radars and sensors. Especially I think when it comes to, they said that usually UAP incidents fall into like one of 5 categories, right? So
Yeah.
like airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, USG, or U.S. industrial developmental programs, foreign adversary systems, and a catch-all other bin. Yeah, I was really surprised by that.
I think the other bin is especially interesting because nowhere in this report do they say anything about extraterrestrials.
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
You know, they're just anything that a UFO, like a ufologist, a member of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, for example, would say that these unexplained reports are extraterrestrial, whereas this report remains pretty agnostic about those. which is very interesting because only one of the reports mentioned here was explained. It was a deflating weather balloon. Everything else was like, we don't know what it was. So that's very interesting to me.
I laughed out loud at that part. Literally, because I think you were mentioning it even last class too, but then when I actually just read it, I'm just like, it was just a balloon. Like, that's what I mean. Like, I'm very surprised by that. And then they're still requesting what more funding for this area of research.
Yeah, which, but that's the American, that's the military industrial complex, right? The Americans have the largest military the world's ever seen, and they devote an enormous amount of their budget toward this military, maintaining this massive military. Why don't they just stop? Well, they don't want to lose their status as a superpower, but also, what would you do with all of those people? All of that industry, it would just grind to a halt. And the American economy, I mean, it's terrible. But this is why Eisenhower, in his farewell speech when he was when his presidency ended, said, "I'm worried about this, guys." You know, it's like a vicious cycle, the military-industrial complex. So why fund so much? Well, UFOs, I mean, or UAPs, chances are the ones that they're going to want to take seriously could be foreign adversary systems, right? They could be some kind of advanced drone from China or Russia or something like that, right? And the Americans don't want that. So, yeah, I agree with Jean-Francois. Who wouldn't want to be paid to chase UFO sightings with a pension? I mean, yeah, for sure. Like, I think it would be really cool to, what a cushy job is if you were brought in as a consultant for the government, like on like the Stargate program or on UFOs, and you were paid ridiculous amounts of government taxpayer money just to be like, I don't think psychics are real. Here's why. That's the dream, you know?
Totally.
Or they put me on the payroll and I get a sweet pension. Like, hell yeah. That'd be great. But yeah, this report is very interesting. I think it's cool that of these 140 reports that originated from US government sources, 80 observed observation with multiple sensors. So we're talking like visual plus radar or infrared. So we know something is there, but we don't know what it is. Toward the end of the report, they mentioned something that I think is quite interesting, and which, so here's some of the weird ones. In 18 incidents described in 21 reports, observers reported unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics. Some UAP appear to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. In a small number of cases, military aircraft systems processed radio frequency energy associated with UAP sightings. That is interesting. But of course, unless we actually have the artifact, if it is an artifact, we don't know. How can we come to know? Well, later on, you say here we have the national safety concerns, national security concerns, but later on, the recommendations, to me, I think this is my favorite part. What they want to do, the UAP task force, which, well, dream job, man, that'd be so great to be on the UAPTF. We need to standardize methods of reporting. You know, different branches of the military might have different ways of keeping track of all this stuff, you know? Maybe pilots in the Navy are not doing the same sorts of things as people in the Air Force or the Army are doing, right? So between all of the different branches, we need to standardize reporting, and that'll allow us to consolidate the data, to get a big giant database going, and then we deepen the analysis. The way they suggest doing this is artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. And yeah, that I think is probably the sexiest bit of UFO research I've ever heard of. And the reason I say that is because machine learning is very in right now, and it's also very powerful. Is anyone familiar with machine learning?
Like Big Blue, like solving chess problems, that kind of thing.
Deep
Yeah.
Blue is an
Deep Blue,
early
yeah.
example.
Okay.
Probably a better example nowadays would be Alpha Zero. So if you know about Alpha Zero, well, you like chess, Jean-Francois. Do you want to tell
Yeah.
everybody about Alpha Zero?
That's the Go robot, right? No.
Well, AlphaGo was the Go one.
Oh,
Alpha Zero is
okay.
the chess. So it is a deep learning neural network.
Yeah.
Neural networks are really they're ridiculously complicated mathematical functions, but you can think of them as artificial neurons, and they're arranged in layers. And deep networks have many different layers, and we can teach them to do things by showing them stuff and training the network. So when it comes to machine learning isn't all neural networks. Some of it is what you call classical AI, like the ID3 learning algorithm is a very famous example of that. It's not a neural network, but it does construct what we call decision trees from a database. So Deep Blue would have been something like this, where Deep Blue might construct decision trees from databases of chess games, so in so many games, if white plays this move at this point in the game, it wins 70% of the time, so I'm going to make this move, right? But AlphaGo or Alpha Zero are neural networks that learn to play their games by playing against themselves, and their performance is very impressive. Alpha Zero has beaten most of the top chess engines. Then again, a lot of those chess engines come back and beat it. People are always tinkering with them, trying to make them better. Man, I could do a whole thing on computers and chess, but that's not paranormal. But that's machine learning. We are training the machine rather than programming the machine. We could take deep learning algorithms and perhaps apply them to the data that we're collecting here. And that might give some new insights into what exactly we're dealing with. It might help us identify things, but it also might tell us more about how they move, where they tend to appear. Machine learning will give us access to a lot of statistics that we simply can't do, right? Machine learning, if we had a massive database and we applied machine learning and deep learning to it, we would get a huge picture very quickly. That's why this is powerful. And I think that's the number one way to make this scientifically credible, right? Sagan says as much in his documentary when talking about ancient Egypt. The unbridled speculation of amateurs scared many professionals right out of the field of Egyptology. And the exact same thing is true of studying UFOs and alien life. Sagan was one of the only astronomers at this time to take any of this seriously. Most astronomers they're like, you want me to do a documentary and talk about UFOs? My career will be over, right? Sagan was one of the only people doing this at the time. And good for him, good on him. Because as I've said in previous lectures, if scientists do not engage with this, amateurs will. And amateurs will not do a good job of it, right? Amateurs will fall for hoaxes. Amateurs will not do science properly. I respect their intense passion, but many of them just don't put in the time to earn the expertise that they want to say they have, right? And that's why I love teaching this class too. I think a lot of my colleagues would balk at the offer to do this, but I jumped on it because I thought, what an opportunity. We can engage with these ideas. We can shine a light on them. Let's shine that natural light of reason on them. Because, we're still learning stuff, right? So anyway, I hope you all feel the same. I imagine since you're sticking with the class, yeah, you're also not afraid to engage with the weird and the unexplained. So that's great.
Wasn't Sagan lambasted too by his peers? Like he was always like thinking he was hypothesizing about like the unknown and what have you. He wasn't afraid to talk about it. Like
Yeah.
some of his cohorts. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people even accused him of not being a very good scientist because he was doing popular science. And that is just nonsense. Sagan was an excellent scientist. He wasn't like Albert Einstein, but like most people's PhDs just sit in a drawer, right? Sagan's actually made a difference in planetary astronomy. He was a very good astronomer, right? He maybe wasn't Albert Einstein or Richard Feynman, but he was excellent. And I would venture to argue, yeah, as Jean-Francois says here, he is arguably the best science communicator that the human race has ever seen. I mean, nobody tops him. People are too, I don't know. Sagan never lost that open mind. Some scientists, aliens, no, we can't talk about that. No evidence. But look, we can speculate. We just have to be careful to distinguish speculation from fact. And I'm paraphrasing Sagan's opening lines of the first episode of this series. Extraordinary claims, extraordinary evidence. That's that whole thing. But as the authors of that abominable science book had said in one of their chapters, when experts don't engage with this, it does a disservice to everybody, because amateurs will engage with it and they'll do it badly. And also people genuinely want to know, right? People really are curious about whether there could be life after death or ghosts or psychic powers or aliens. These things are compelling. The thought of these things makes life interesting. And for me, even if they don't exist, understanding why we believe they exist is also interesting and is worth pursuing. So, yeah, be more like Carl Sagan, everyone. Be like Carl Sagan. But I think, yeah, just to get back to my original point, this is, I think, the key to making this enterprise scientific. Let's not go out with our shaky video cameras. No, let's get stuff from, if you got a military aircraft with like radar and gun cameras and a pilot who saw something, that's okay. There was something there. Let's put that in a database, machine learning. We'll probably get to the bottom of something, I bet. Any other thoughts about this before we wrap up? Oh, one thing I wanted to ask everybody, has anyone in this class ever seen a UFO? Or seen what you would describe as a UFO, something in the sky where you didn't know what it was? Oh, that's a shame. That's a shame. Now, I was really hoping that somebody may have seen something, because people do see crazy things in the sky that they don't know what it is, right?
I used to see bats at night, but I thought I couldn't see bats. I was looking at the night sky and there'd be silhouettes that would just kind of overpass. From the stars, and I thought, like, what's that? And then it turns out those bats that were eating bugs around my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have that too. On my balcony, there's some bats that live up in this building because it's an old building, and in the summer they fly around, and I can sit outside and just watch them and hang out with them. And fascinating critters. They come into this corner here and they chirp they use their sonar. Very neat. Alexis, you were going to say something as well, yeah?
Oh, well, I haven't seen any, but just what you were discussing right now about the bats, my mom would be screaming if she in that situation, so she'd be cringing so much. But I don't remember if you mentioned it before, Professor, but have you seen like anything like that, like an UFO or a UAP or anything like that before?
I have not, and I wish I had, because I think it would be, I've never really had that. See, so the reason I say this is because it's difficult for me as a skeptic to put myself into a believer's shoes, where I'm confronted by something that my powers of reason can't explain. I've never experienced that, but I want to know what that's like. But everything that I've seen, apparent ghosts in photographs, strange coincidences, When I was young, I even had like a bit of a panic disorder around strange weather. I lived in southern Ontario, where we would get sometimes severe thunderstorms and the occasional tornado. And I developed almost like this kind of sixth sense for this sort of thing. But it wasn't anything spooky. It's because I'm like, you know, the neurodivergent kid in class who notices things. And, you know, so, and one of the ways I got over my irrational fear was learning about stuff, you know. But I was kind of spooked out, and I didn't really know what was going on. And my mom, especially, who was kind of open-minded about the paranormal, thought like, oh, maybe Josh is a special boy with, you know, some kind of insight. No, I just noticed details and had peculiar emotional reactions to things. So I guess that's kind of the closest I've ever come to something like that. But again, I've never seen a thing where it's like, what? Like, I've never had a ghost encounter where there's stuff fly. Like, I would love that. Like, go to a haunted house and stuff starts flying off the walls. What's that like? I don't know. I really want to know what it's like to be on the other end, to see something that you actually cannot account for with your knowledge and your beliefs and your worldview. I want to know what it's like, and I have tried.
I think I might be able to give some insight. I just, as you're talking about it now, I'll make this really short. My sister's previous roommate, one, I forgot to mention this earlier, but she says that she can actually like see ghosts and everything. That's one thing. And then two, my cousin says that she worked at a dance studio, and there's this ghost named Carla who lives at the studio or whatever. So there'd be flying discs that like a CD. It would just be sitting somewhere, and it would just go flying across the room and everything. And all the children there are like, oh, it's Carla, it's a friendly ghost and everything like that. So that's the closest I've ever been to those experiences.
Yeah. And that's when I talk to people, it is often second order testimony like that. Well, people will tell me something similar, like, well, I heard from my friend who heard from their friend, and I'm like, that's interesting. But you know, it's something that I have to see for myself, you know. It's not like I'm going to say like, oh, that person's clearly insane. No, I'm just going to say like, okay, but that is so unbelievable that I need to see it, you know. So I've done all kinds of things, you know. When I was a kid, I tried dowsing. No, just the ideomotor effect. Tried learning about astrology, pseudoscience. I'm not picking on religion, but I even went to church once. And that was a curious experience. You know, I've tried to have anomalous experiences. I guess the only ones I've really had would be lucid dreams. But of course, those aren't really very paranormal. We know how those work. So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, speaking of dreams, next time we're going to talk about dreams. We're going to talk about why we have them, how they work. We'll talk about their association with the paranormal and the supernatural. Yeah. Well, you know, I'm supposed to be a good example as the instructor. So, you know, yeah, I guess. Stuff definitely gets interesting. But that's why that's why, I mean, in the other lecture, when I mentioned machine elves, right? Terence McKenna, machine elves, because on some psychedelic substances, people will believe they've encountered beings. But I think those beings are in here, like a dream. It's offline or semi-offline. The weird thing is, at least with my, I'll qualify this by saying my extremely limited experience with these things, is that what tends to happen is that it's building off of what's already coming in from like online. So, you know, you might look at the clouds and the clouds are just like crazy, like moving around, breathing and doing some crazy stuff. So your psychedelically affected brain is taking what's coming in and doing something different with it. So it's kind of offline, online, whereas dreams are usually mostly offline. Although it sometimes happens when maybe you hear your alarm go off and it gets incorporated into your dream that you're having, that you're about to wake up from, right? So that can happen too. So we'll talk about all kinds of interesting stuff like that, particularly lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences, because these were once considered nonsense by most scientists. Now we can explain them. We can explain that it's possible to be aware that you're dreaming while you're dreaming, and we can explain this curious phenomenon where people seem to have left their bodies. It turns out people probably are not leaving their bodies at all. Some OBEs happen in bed, so they're probably just dreams. Others seem to happen during moments of peak performance. And this is very interesting because it's like you're in a flow state. And it's similar to hallucinogens. You can sometimes experience ego death, and you can sometimes experience the sense that you have left your body. And some of them also happen when the brain is dying, near-death experiences and so forth. We'll come back to aliens a little bit too, because we're going to talk about sleep paralysis. So I'm going to post a chapter for Blackboard's book on dreams on the website on Brightspace. So you'll want to read that for next time. That's all for now, though. That was fun. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
And any questions, comments before we go?
No, I have something about the neurodivergent thing, but I'll send you a message about it. I founded a neurodivergent social club at Carleton. Would love to have you as a speaker later on.
Oh, that would be awesome. That would be wonderful. Yeah. Send me a message. We'll figure it out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Okay, well, if that's all, let's wrap it up, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Don't forget about the upcoming deadline for the proposal. And remember, if anyone needs to pick my brain, send me an email or shoot me a message over Discord, and we can discuss any of your questions or concerns. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. All right. I don't need to share the screen anymore. Don't share the screen. What am I doing? I guess, okay, stop recording is what I'm doing.